You know, Yu-Gi-Oh! As a game is actually pretty simple at its core. You use cards to bring down your opponent's life points, and you have different cards to do so. Honestly, not overly complicated. It's the cards themselves, however, that can complicate things. Some have fairly simple effects, while others not so much. The same goes for the various archetypes. Some are rather complex, like Triple D, which utilizes every summoning method in the game and is highly variable, and some are like Numeron, where it's just CHARGE! And in the former half of that spectrum are Flower Cardians, a card archetype where you need to know how to play Hanafuda in order to play properly. Oh yeah. The Flower Cardians were introduced in 2016 in the set Dragons of Legend Unleashed, and are inspired by, as mentioned before, Hanafuda, a Japanese card game that's been around since the days of the samurai. They are all Dark Warrior monsters, and their gimmick is that you sacrifice one to bring out another. More on that later though. It should be noted these guys came out during the Arc 5 era of Yu-Gi-Oh! An era where the game was trying out a lot of new ideas and techniques that added a lot of complexity to the game. And whenever people make fun of Yu-Gi-Oh! For being overly complicated, chances are it's from this era. But this era did give us a lot of great archetypes. So many, in fact, I gotta flash them on screen because there's so many. And Flower Cardians definitely were on the more complex side, especially because, as mentioned before, they're based on another real-world card game. I have no idea how Hanafuda works, so I brought in a fellow Yu-Gi-Oh! Fan, Broken Doll VT, to explain how it works.
There are many different ways to play Hanafuda. My personal favorite is Koi Koi. You have 8 cards shown in a bottom row. On your turn, you should discard one of them so that it matches up with the card you select in one of the 8 cards in the center area. If there is no matching up, the card you select will remain in the center area. The cards matched up come to your card located at
Okay, so let me put it like this. Essentially, you sacrifice one Flower Cardian to bring out another, provided the circumstances are correct. And when you do, you draw a card. And if it's another Flower Cardian, you can use all sorts of effects depending on the card. Destroy monsters, rearrange the order of cards on your opponent's deck, destroy spell or trap cards, special summon another Flower Cardian, etc. In theory, you can keep this going for a stupidly long time, so if you get max seed and your opponent draws a card every time you summon a monster, it's totally possible to deck them out just by continuously bringing them out, which is kind of hilarious. Honestly, the setup for these guys is pretty great, getting you not only several monsters, but also getting rid of a lot of stuff on your opponent's field. Couple that with some great ways to reuse other Flower Cardians and some stellar spell support which can bring out more Flower Cardians and set up the top of your deck to let you fully utilize their abilities. These guys are a blast to use in the setup. It's a shame about their end board though. To quickly explain an end board to those who may not have heard the term, this refers to what the minimum amount of cards you want to have on the field are. For example, Sword Soul players set it up so they have Yugioh and Baron de Fleur out. Prank Kids players work to set up for Battle Butler during their opponent's turns. Pretty simple really. Despite all the build-up though, Flower Cardians really don't have much of an endgame outside of their synchro monsters. While it is neat that a Flower Cardian tuner can treat it and other Flower Cardians as level 2, they don't really have a lot of effects that are helpful during your opponent's turn, making these guys useless on the first turn. It's a shame because they do have some neat abilities. Moonflower Viewing can let you draw and special summon a Flower Cardian, albeit you skip your next draw phase, and is also a tuner herself. Boardfly lets your monsters do piercing damage, and by banishing a Flower Cardian from the graveyard, negates all of your opponent's effects that activate in the graveyard or deal with the graveyard, which is pretty awesome. Light Shower makes it so all Flower Cardians can't be targeted by card effects or destroyed by card effects, and does 1500 to your opponents when they draw a card for their draw phase, but you have to skip your draw phase at the end of your opponent's turn if you want to keep these effects up. And finally, there's Lightflare, who not only has 5000 attack points, but has a neat ability of negating one spell or trap card per turn. And when he attacks, he negates all of your opponent's effects during and after the battle. And if he's destroyed, he can bring out another Flower Cardian synchro monster. All of this makes for some great aggressive play. It's not the best for defense, however, especially because the old standby of hand traps and other classic spell and trap cards are a bad idea in this deck. Because Flower Cardians rely on you drawing more Flower Cardians, this means that their hand traps and other staple spell and traps can ruin your game plan. The spell cards Flower Cardians use try to mitigate this with effects for if they're sent to the graveyard, but it doesn't matter as it's all for bringing out more Flower Cardians, nothing to actually protect them. It's especially odd as you think with the constant drawing and adding to your hand, there'd be at least some hand traps, but barring ones that boost up attack points, there's nothing here. I understand that aggro decks like this don't typically have a lot of protection, but at least a lot of them have something. Marincess have Marincess Wave, Ultra Athletes have Perfect Ace, even Warrocks have Warrock Dignity. I repeat, Warrocks So on top of a brief but still tricky learning curve, there's not really a lot going on to protect these guys from being completely destroyed. Again, the buildup is honestly far better than the actual payoff. That being said, I can see in the early game of Master Duel this being an actually pretty helpful deck for new players, especially with how cheap a lot of the cards are. Only the synchros are super rares or ultra rares, which is pretty refreshing. But I can only recommend this deck as a cheap one to help you through the early game, and even then, there are far better aggro decks that can be tweaked to be helpful later on. So for this one, while it gets my money-friendly award, I'm also going to give it a seal of mediocrity. It's not the worst, and it's not like these guys aren't fun to play. They just don't have much going for them in the late game. But who knows, maybe that's just me. If you run Flower Cardians, let me know. How do you play them? What do you think, Broken Doll?
You select one of the 8 cards in the center area. If there is no matching up, the card you select will remain in the center area. The cards matched up come to your card located at the bottom right. You win when you get